Every year, the global supplement industry collects over $200 billion from people searching for the health answers their doctors don't have time to give them. Capsule, powders, proprietary blends, each one promising what the last one couldn't deliver, and yet for thousands of years, before the first laboratory was ever built, before the first clinical trial was ever designed, people were eating meals that kept them strong, clear-headed, resilient against illness, and physically capable well into old age. Not because they were lucky, because they were paying close attention. The Bible is not a nutrition manual, but embedded throughout its texts in laws, in narratives, in prophetic accounts, in the details of royal feasts and desert survival is a record of exactly what the ancient world ate. And that record turns out to be extraordinarily specific. Specific foods, specific combinations, specific preparations that kept entire populations functioning without any of the chronic disease that now consumes the modern world. Today we're breaking down 12 of those meals. Meals built from the biblical food record, cross-referenced with what modern nutritional science is now confirming about why they worked. Pay close attention to number 1. It comes directly from a passage in Deuteronomy where God names 7 specific foods, not a region, not a principle, 7 foods by name. When nutritional researchers analyzed those 7 foods together as a system, what they found was not what anyone expected. And watch for number 4. Because what happens in that passage, a dying king, a prophet, and a preparation made from figs is one of the most quietly remarkable intersections of ancient medicine and modern biochemistry you will ever encounter. 12 meals. Thousands of years of observed results. Let's get into it. Number 12. Cucumber mint yogurt bowl. In Numbers 11, the Israelites, wandering through the wilderness, compile a grief list, foods they are mourning from their years in Egypt. Cucumbers appear on it by name. So do leeks and garlic. These were not luxury items. In a culture that produced them cheaply and abundantly, they were daily survival staples. And in a hot, arid climate, where heat exhaustion was a constant threat and water sources were unreliable, eating cucumbers daily was not preference. It was strategy. Cucumbers are composed of more than 96% water by weight. In environments where dehydration is a persistent medical reality, that matters enormously. But beyond hydration, cucumbers contain silica, a mineral compound that most modern diets are almost entirely devoid of, which supports the integrity of connective tissue, skin elasticity, and joint cartilage. They also contain vitamin K for blood coagulation and bone mineralization, and cucurbitacins, bitter compounds concentrated in the skin that have shown anti-inflammatory activity in laboratory research. This is why the ancient world ate the whole cucumber, skin and all, in a way that most modern preparation discards. Now pair those cucumbers with fermented goat's milk yogurt, and the nutritional conversation changes entirely. Goat's milk contains primarily A2 beta-casein rather than the A1 casein dominant in commercial cow's milk. Research published in peer-reviewed journals suggests that A2 casein produces significantly less inflammatory response in the human gut lining and causes fewer digestive complaints in people who consider themselves lactose intolerant because many of those complaints are casein reactions, not lactose reactions at all. Fermented into yogurt, that goat's milk becomes a living culture delivery system. Billions of beneficial bacteria, including specific strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, that colonize the intestinal tract and produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is the primary energy source for your colon cells, and a documented reducer of intestinal inflammation. Add fresh mint, not as garnish, but as a functional ingredient, and you engage a mechanism most people have never heard of. Mint contains menthol and related compounds that activate TRPM8 cold receptors in the gastrointestinal tract, producing a real, measurable relaxation of smooth muscle in the gut wall. This is not a folk sensation. It's a documented pharmacological response. Studies have found that peppermint oil reduces spasm, bloating, and pain and irritable bowel syndrome more effectively than many pharmaceutical interventions with a fraction of the side effects. 1 cup of full-fat goat yogurt. Half a cucumber, sliced thin, with the skin left on. A generous handful of fresh mint, torn rather than cut. And a pinch of sea salt. Serve cold. Eat it in the heat of the day. The way the people of the biblical world actually did. The Egyptians didn't call it a probiotic delivery system. They called it lunch. The outcome was the same. Number 11. Garlic and herb lentil soup. If you were designing the most immunologically potent meal possible, using only ingredients available in the ancient biblical world, you would likely end up building something very close to this. Not because the ancient world was guessing, because they had accumulated centuries of observation about what kept people alive and what didn't. Lentils are among the oldest cultivated legumes on Earth, with archaeological evidence of their use dating back 9,000 years in the Fertile Crescent. In 2 Samuel 17, lentils appear among the foods carried to sustain. David and his men in the wilderness described alongside roasted grain and beans as emergency provisions for people under extreme physical duress. That is a precise nutritional portrait. Lentils deliver complete plant protein when combined with grain. Slow-burning complex carbohydrates that sustain energy across hours without blood sugar disruption. Iron, folate, and resistant starch, a fiber type that your digestive enzymes cannot break down, but your gut bacteria can, producing butyrate and feeding the immune cells, clustered throughout the intestinal wall. But the transformation happens when you add garlic, generously. The way the ancient world actually used it, not as a flavor note, but as a dominant ingredient. When raw garlic is crushed or chopped, a sulfur compound called alliin comes into contact with an enzyme called alliinase. And within seconds, allicin is formed. Allicin is one of the most biologically active sulfur compounds in the plant kingdom. It has shown documented activity against a wide spectrum of bacterial strains, including antibiotic-resistant varieties, against multiple classes of viruses, against fungal infections, and against intestinal parasites. Egyptian medical papyri, including the Ebers papyrus dated to approximately 1550 BCE, list garlic in over 20 separate therapeutic preparations. This was not primitive folk magic. It was the accumulated result of watching what garlic did across generations and recording it with precision. Add cumin, which has been shown to stimulate bile production, aid fat digestion, and reduce post-meal blood sugar response. Add coriander, whose active compounds, particularly linalool, have shown documented calming effects on inflamed gut mucosa. Finish with cold-pressed olive oil added after the soup leaves the heat, not during cooking, because the polyphenols that make olive oil valuable are degraded by sustained high temperature. This soup has existed in its essential form for 5,000 years. It doesn't need a rebrand. It needs a pot on your stove and a commitment to making it weekly. Number 10. Pomegranate and barley grain bowl. King Solomon's temple had 200 pomegranates carved into its architectural pillars. The robe of the high priest was decorated with pomegranate ornaments in blue, purple, and scarlet thread. In the Song of Solomon, the pomegranate appears repeatedly as an image of abundance and vitality. This fruit was worked into the most sacred architecture of the ancient world. And the question worth asking is, why? The pomegranate contains a compound called punicolagon, found in almost no other food source on Earth, that the gut microbiome converts into a substance called urolithin A. This conversion happens in the intestinal tract, and its effects have become one of the most studied areas of natural compound research in the last decade. Urolithin A has shown the ability to trigger a cellular cleanup process called mitophagy, the selective removal of damaged mitochondria from cells, which is one of the mechanisms researchers associate with cellular aging and metabolic decline. Studies have found pomegranate consumption associated with reduced blood pressure, improved arterial elasticity, and significant decreases in oxidized LDL cholesterol. The concentration of polyphenol antioxidants in pomegranate outranks red wine, green tea, and blueberries, by most measurements. Build this into a grain bowl with whole barley as the base. Barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan fiber found in any grain, a soluble fiber that forms a viscous gel in the digestive tract and removes LDL cholesterol from circulation by binding bile acids before they can be reabsorbed. The regulatory authorization for heart health claims on beta-glucan products reflects decades of consistent clinical evidence. Scatter pomegranate seeds throughout the grain. Dress with cold-pressed olive oil. Add crumbled aged goat cheese for probiotic content and protein, and a handful of walnuts for omega-3 fatty acids. The people who carved pomegranates into stone did not know the name urolithin A. They knew what happened to people who ate pomegranates regularly, over decades. Sometimes, the oldest observations survive precisely because they are the most reliable ones. Number 9. Dates stuffed with nuts. The date palm appears more frequently than any other fruit-bearing tree across the biblical text. Jericho was called the City of Palms. Deborah, the prophetess and judge, held her court beneath one. Desert travelers, soldiers crossing the Sinai, pilgrims moving through the Judean wilderness, all of them carried dates, because dates kept people moving when nothing else could. Dates contain naturally occurring glucose and fructose in a ratio that allows rapid intestinal absorption and almost immediate glycogen replenishment in fatigued muscle tissue, but unlike refined sugar, that energy arrives in a matrix of soluble fiber. Magnesium, potassium, copper, manganese, and B, vitamins that buffers the metabolic impact and sustains the release. Multiple randomized controlled trials have documented that women who consume dates regularly in the final 4 weeks of pregnancy experience significantly higher rates of spontaneous labor onset, shorter active labor duration, and reduced need for medical intervention. The mechanism appears to involve compounds that interact with oxytocin receptors. This was not known to the ancient world by name, but the practice of giving dates to laboring women across Middle Eastern cultures, spanning millennia, suggests that the observation was made and preserved. Now stuff those dates with almonds, walnuts, or pistachios. This is where the nutritional math becomes genuinely interesting. The fat and protein from the nuts slow gastric emptying and delay glucose absorption from the date, converting what would otherwise be a rapid energy spike into a sustained, even release. Rapid fuel becomes long-duration fuel. Pistachios are among the richest prebiotic foods. Studied clinical trials show that pistachio consumption significantly shifts the ratio of beneficial to harmful gut bacteria within a matter of weeks, with effects that outperform most other nuts in microbiome research. Walnuts deliver alpha-linolenic acid, a plant form omega-3 that the body partially converts to the long-chain forms associated with cardiovascular and cognitive protection. Almonds provide vitamin E in its most bioavailable natural form, tocopherol, alongside magnesium in concentrations that support over 300 enzymatic processes. 3 to 4 medjool dates, each one split and filled with 2 whole almonds or 3 pistachios. Eat them at midday when energy typically flags, the way desert travelers have done for 3,000 years. The tradition of breaking the Ramadan fast with dates is over 1,000 years old. The body absorbs them gently, efficiently, and gratefully. After a long deprivation, the ancient world understood this intuitively. The clinical evidence has since explained why. Number 8. Grape and goat cheese plate with herbs. Noah plants a vineyard as his first act. After the waters recede, grapes appear at the Passover table. Throughout the Song of Solomon, and in some of the most consequential moments of both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, in John 15, Jesus says, "I am the true vine." The vine is not incidental imagery in Scripture. It carries weight that the people who first heard these words would have understood viscerally, because grapes were not just food. They were daily medicine. Fresh grapes concentrate resveratrol primarily in their skins, along with a broader family of polyphenol compounds including quercetin and catechins. Research has associated these compounds with the activation of sirtuins, a class of proteins that regulate cellular stress responses. DNA repair, and mitochondrial function. More practically, clinical studies have found that regular grape consumption is associated with reduced markers of oxidative stress, improved endothelial function, and lower platelet aggregation, meaning the blood flows more freely and the artery walls respond more elastically to pressure changes. The seeds, which most people discard, contain oligomeric proanthocyanidins, OPCs, that have shown documented effects on microcirculation and capillary integrity that researchers describe as among the most potent plant-derived cardiovascular compounds identified. Eat the seeds. Chew them. The ancient world did. Pair fresh grapes with aged goat cheese, a concentrated to fermented form that delivers high-quality protein alongside probiotic cultures that have survived the aging process. Add fresh hyssop, which appears throughout Scripture as a purification herb and which contains the volatile compound thymol, the same compound concentrated in thyme and shown to have direct antimicrobial activity against a range of foodborne pathogens. Add a handful of whole olives, which bring oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory that operates on the same enzymatic pathway as ibuprofen. The combination of resveratrol from grapes and the beneficial bacteria in fermented goat cheese is an area of active research interest. Early findings suggest that polyphenols from grapes act as prebiotics for certain beneficial bacterial strains, while those bacteria in turn enhance the bioavailability of the polyphenols, a bidirectional enhancement that neither food produces as effectively alone. This plate takes 7 minutes to assemble. It has been assembled in essentially this form for 4,000 years. Number 7. Roasted lamb with dates and herbs. Lamb is the most ceremonially significant animal in all of Scripture. The Passover lamb, the ram caught in the thicket when Abraham raised his knife over Isaac. The Lamb of God in the Gospel of John. Its presence at ancient tables was not only symbolic, for people living hard physical lives in harsh climates, it was nutritional in ways that made it irreplaceable. Slow-roasted lamb provides B12 in concentrations found in almost no plant-based source, B12 being the vitamin directly responsible for the myelin sheathing that insulates every nerve fiber in the human body, and the one deficiency most consistently linked to cognitive decline as people age. It provides B6 for neurotransmitter synthesis and amino acid metabolism, riboflavin for mitochondrial energy production, and zinc, in its most bioavailable heme-bound form, absorbed at rates 2 to 3 times higher than plant-source zinc. Zinc is required for the activation of over 70 metalloenzymes and plays a direct role in T-cell development, wound healing, and the regulation of inflammatory response for anyone recovering from illness, depleted by overwork, or running low after months of physical labor. This meal was a physiological restoration. Ancient communities didn't need laboratory panels to recognize when someone was running on empty. They could see it, and they knew what to cook. The dates served alongside are not decoration. Fruit acids in dates, primarily malic acid and tartaric acid, create a mildly acidic digestive environment that measurably enhances non-heme iron absorption in the small intestine. Clinical trials have confirmed this effect. The combination of iron-rich meat with acid-containing fruit produces synergistically better iron absorption than either consumed alone. Now here is what most people overlook about the herbs. Roasted over rosemary, thyme, and hyssop, all mentioned throughout the biblical text. The volatile aromatic compounds infused into the meat during slow cooking include thymol, rosmarinic acid, and ursulic acid. Rosmarinic acid specifically has shown documented activity against the lipase enzymes that degrade animal fats in the digestive tract, making the fat in slow-cooked lamb significantly easier to process. This wasn't accidental seasoning. It was accumulated practical knowledge about how to make powerful food safer and more complete. One leg of lamb, studded with garlic, draped with fresh rosemary and thyme, slow roasted for 3 to 4 hours at low heat until the connective tissue has broken down into collagen-rich gelatin. Serve with 6 to 8 medjool dates and a handful of fresh herb leaves on the side. Let the heat fall to serving temperature before eating. The proteins continue to realign as the meat rests. and the fat redistributes more evenly. This meal has been eaten at the most significant moments of human life: births, returns from war, réconciliation, religious observances for reasons that go beyond ceremony. It rebuilt people. The research is now beginning to articulate exactly how. Number 6. Figs and almond flour cakes. Here is a detail buried in the book of 2 Kings that most people walk past without stopping. King Hezekiah is dying. The text describes a severe boil in the original Hebrew. A shechin, a term used for deep, systemic infections, abscesses, septic wounds. The kind of infection that, in the ancient world, and even in early modern medicine, carried a very real probability of death. The prophet Isaiah arrives and delivers what sounds, initially, like a theological instruction. He orders a poultice of figs, pressed figs, applied directly to the wound. The king recovers. Scholars have argued about the theological meaning of this account for centuries, but the biochemical dimension has received far less attention. Figs contain ficin, a proteolytic enzyme, meaning an enzyme that breaks down proteins, specifically damaged and necrotic tissue. Applied topically to a wound, ficin does what a physician would now call debridement, the enzymatic removal of dead tissue to allow the wound bed to close cleanly. Fig latex, the milky fluid from cut stems and unripe fruit, has shown inhibitory effects against multiple bacterial strains in laboratory studies, including pathogens common to wound infections. Isaiah's prescription wasn't poetry. It was practical medicine that anticipated mechanisms biochemists wouldn't name for another 3,000 years. Eaten as food. Figs are among the most mineral-dense fruits available. A serving of dried figs provides calcium in concentrations that rival dairy, along with potassium, magnesium, iron, and a fiber type called pectin that acts as a selective prebiotic feeding, bifidobacterium specifically, the bacterial genus most closely associated with reduced intestinal inflammation and improved immune regulation. Pair figs with almond flour ground almonds, prepared the way they would have been throughout the ancient world, before refined grain flour existed as a category, and the combination becomes nutritionally remarkable. Almonds deliver vitamin E in its natural tocopherol form, a fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage. They provide magnesium, which is required for proper insulin signaling, and healthy monounsaturated fats that slow carbohydrate absorption and reduce the glycemic response of the figs. Studies have found that almond consumption reduces LDL oxidation, improves gut microbiome diversity, and lowers post-meal blood sugar more effectively than most low-glycemic grain substitutes. The almond blossom was carved into the seven-branched menorah, the sacred lamp that was to burn continuously in the tabernacle. Aaron's rod, the symbol of divine authority that miraculously budded overnight, produced almonds. The ancient world encoded this nut into objects meant to last forever. That kind of cultural permanence doesn't happen by accident. 4 dried figs, 2 tablespoons of raw almond flour, a teaspoon of raw honey, a pinch of cardamom, pressed together into small cakes and eaten at rest the way they were prepared and eaten in households across the ancient Near East. The body receives minerals, fat-soluble vitamins, prebiotic fiber, and slow-release energy in a form it recognizes and uses efficiently. Isaiah didn't explain the mechanism. He didn't need to. Number 5. Chickpea and olive herb salad. If you're finding that this ancient knowledge still holds up, hit like and subscribe, because what we're covering in the final 4 goes even deeper. There is no single dramatic scriptural moment for chickpeas. No miracle built around them. No prophet calling them out by name for a specific healing purpose. They were simply always present, boiled into stews, ground into flour, eaten whole with herbs and oil throughout the ancient Near East for at least 10,000 years. And that is, in its own way, the entire story. Foods do not persist across 100 centuries of human civilization unless something about them genuinely works at a level people can feel. Chickpeas were eaten at every economic level. In every season, in every region of the biblical world, they were the foundational legume of a civilization that outlasted most of its contemporaries. Chickpeas have a glycemic index of approximately 28, among the lowest of any carbohydrate-containing food ever measured. Despite significant carbohydrate content, they produce almost no blood sugar response. In most people, primarily because their resistant starch must be fermented by gut bacteria before any glucose enters circulation. That fermentation process produces butyrate and propionate short-chain fatty acids that reduce systemic inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and lower LDL cholesterol through pathways that are independent of and complementary to statin drugs. The protein and fiber together create a satiety signal through multiple hormonal pathways, CCK, GLP, ANA, and PYY, that sustains the feeling of fullness for 3 to 5 hours. Dress them with cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, and the combination begins to do something remarkable. The polyphenols in olive oil, particularly hydroxytyrosol, one of the most bioavailable antioxidants in the human diet, are fat-soluble, meaning they require a fat medium to be absorbed. The olive oil is not a condiment. It is a delivery mechanism for its own active compounds. Add fresh hyssop, mint, or coriander, 3 herbs, referenced throughout the biblical text, and you layer documented antimicrobial and digestive activity on top of the entire nutritional base. Coriander seeds were found in the tomb of Tutankhamun and in Bronze Age storage vessels throughout the region. Their persistence across cultures and millennia of food history reflects what the people eating them observed. 1 can of whole chickpeas, drained but not rinsed. The liquid contains soluble fiber, worth keeping in the dish, dressed with 2 tablespoons of cold-pressed olive oil, fresh herbs, lemon juice, and coarse salt. Add whole olives for additional oleocanthal content. Eat it cold, the way fieldworkers across the ancient world ate it. Modern research has found that regular legume consumption, beans eaten daily or near daily, is the single dietary habit most consistently associated with longevity across every culture studied. Not a supplement, not a protocol, just beans, eaten faithfully, across a lifetime. The ancient world didn't need a longitudinal study. They had 10,000 years of results. Number 4. Barley bread with olive oil. Most people think of bread as filler, a vehicle for other things. The ancient world understood bread as foundation, the thing on which everything else rested, and the specific bread they ate every single day was doing something inside the body that modern nutritional science spent decades trying to explain. When Jesus feeds 5,000 people in the Gospel of John, the loaves used are not wheat loaves. They are barley loaves, the bread of farmers, soldiers, and ordinary laborers throughout the ancient world. The distinction mattered. Wheat was the grain of the wealthy. Barley fed everyone else. And it turns out, the grain that fed everyone else was doing something more profound for the body than the refined wheat that replaced it. Barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan fiber found in any grain on Earth, a specific soluble fiber that forms a slow-moving, highly viscous gel in the small intestine. This gel does 3 things simultaneously. It traps bile acids and removes them from circulation before they can be reabsorbed, forcing the liver to synthesize new bile acids from LDL cholesterol, directly pulling harmful cholesterol out of the bloodstream. It slows the rate at which glucose is absorbed from everything else consumed in the same meal, producing a sustained, even blood sugar curve rather than a spike. And it becomes the primary food source for Bacteroides and Bifidobacterium species in the large intestine, producing short-chain fatty acids that feed the colon wall and regulate immune response. The regulatory authorization for heart health labeling on beta-glucan-containing products in multiple countries reflects decades of consistent clinical evidence. This is not a fringe finding. It is among the most replicated results in nutritional science. But what makes this ancient loaf genuinely remarkable is not the grain alone. It is what was worked into it. Extra virgin olive oil pressed into the dough during preparation and poured over the surface before eating contains a compound called oleocanthal that most people have never heard of. Oleocanthal inhibits cyclooxygenase enzymes, the same enzymes targeted by ibuprofen and aspirin. It operates on the same anti-inflammatory pathway. Through the same mechanism, with research suggesting comparable potency at normal dietary doses. No stomach irritation. No ulcer risk. No secondary effects. Just a steady, daily lowering of the chronic low-grade inflammation that researchers now associate with the initiation and progression of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, neurodegeneration, and a range of inflammatory conditions. Stone ground, whole barley flour, not pearl barley, not processed barley, but whole grain stone ground flour in which the bran and germ remain intact, mixed with water, a small amount of salt, and pressed with generous amounts of cold-pressed olive oil, baked low and slow, between 300 and 325 degrees Fahrenheit, until the crust is firm but not charred, because sustained high heat degrades both the beta-glucan structure and the polyphenol content of the oil absorbed into the bread during baking. Dense, dark, heavy, and finished with another pour of olive oil while still warm. This was the everyday bread of prophets and fishermen. It was not elegant. It was functional, and eaten every day for a lifetime. It was one of the most effective cardiovascular and metabolic interventions ever practiced without anyone needing to name it as such. Number 3. Lentil and bitter herb Passover bowl. The Passover meal is the most precisely documented communal meal in all of Scripture. Exodus 12 specifies not just the foods, but the order, the timing, the preparation method, and the posture in which it was to be eaten. Roasted lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs maror in Hebrew, most commonly identified as wild chicory, engiv, or horseradish, depending on the region and tradition. The bitter herbs are the element most people overlook. In the ritual, they represent the bitterness of slavery, but their function in the meal tells a different story. Wild chicory and endive contain inulin, one of the most studied prebiotic fibers in nutritional research. Inulin passes through the small intestine, completely undigested, and arrives intact in the large intestine, where it selectively feeds bifidobacterium and lactobacillus species, at the exclusion of harmful bacterial strains. The ratio of beneficial to harmful bacteria in the colon shifts measurably within days of regular chicory consumption. Clinical trials have documented improvements in calcium absorption, reductions in triglyceride levels, and decreases in markers of systemic inflammation in people who consume inulin-rich foods regularly. Horseradish, the other commonly identified bitter herb, contains sinigrin and allyl, isothiocyanate sulfur compounds, in the same chemical family as the compounds in garlic and cruciferous vegetables that activate the liver's phase 2 detoxification enzymes. These enzymes are responsible for neutralizing a wide range of environmental compounds before they can cause cellular damage. The Talmudic tradition of consuming horseradish with the rich proteins of the Passover meal was not incidental. The compounds in horseradish stimulate bile production and digestive enzyme secretion, making the lamb and unleavened bread easier to process completely. Add the lentils that appear in the broader Passover tradition, ground into flour for unleavened bread in some historical preparations, or served whole alongside the ritual foods, and you have the resistant starch, soluble fiber, and complete protein of a food that has sustained human health for 10,000 years. Running underneath the ceremonial meaning of the meal, 1 cup of cooked green or black lentils. Black lentils retain more of their anthocyanin pigment, which functions as an antioxidant in ways similar to blueberries, dressed with lemon juice and cold olive oil, served beside a handful of fresh bitter greens and a small amount of freshly grated horseradish. Eat slowly. This is a meal designed to be eaten with attention. The people who first observed this Passover had been enslaved for generations. They ate this meal standing, dressed for travel. In the hours before they walked away from everything they had known, they ate it as a meal of restoration and preparation. Modern research is now articulating, in the language of biochemistry, why these specific foods did exactly that. Number 2. Fish with mustard herb crust. In Luke Coxicum Mentanelia, the resurrected Jesus appears to his disciples. They are frightened, uncertain, struggling to comprehend what they are experiencing. He says, "Simply, have you anything here to eat?" They give him a piece of broiled fish. He eats it in their presence. This is a quiet moment. But the specificity of the fish broiled, not fried, not boiled, but broiled over a flame, carries meaning that resonates differently when read through the lens of what we now know about how heat affects the essential fatty acids in fish. Broiling preserves EPA and DHA, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids that are the primary structural components of neuronal membranes, the molecules that determine how efficiently neurons signal one another, and the compounds most consistently associated in research with protection against cognitive decline and inflammatory neurological conditions. Frying degrades them. Sustained boiling reduces their bioavailability. The ancient practice of cooking fish directly over flame, the same method documented in John 21. When Jesus cooks fish over coals on the shore for his disciples, turns out to be the method that best preserves the specific compounds that make fish neurologically and cardiovascularly protective. The fish of the Sea of Galilee, in the 1st century, primarily tilapia and sardine species, were cold-water fish with high omega-3 content relative to their size, sardines in particular, because they eat at the bottom of the food chain, accumulate almost no environmental contamination while concentrating omega-3s, vitamin D, and selenium at extraordinary levels for their caloric cost. A serving of sardines provides more than the daily requirement of vitamin B12 and selenium alongside the full omega-3 daily target in fewer than 200 calories. Press a crust of ground mustard seed and dried herbs dill, which appears throughout ancient culinary records of the region, and sautar, the wild thyme that grows throughout the Levant and is referenced in Scripture as a purification herb onto the flesh before broiling. Mustard seed contains sinigrin, the same sulfur compound found in horseradish. That activates detoxification enzymes in the liver and shows documented antimicrobial activity. Dill contains carvone, which relaxes smooth muscle in the digestive tract and stimulates digestive enzyme secretion, making it a traditional digestive aid across multiple ancient cultures simultaneously. One whole fresh sardine, or small fish fillet per person, pressed with a tablespoon of ground mustard seed, fresh dill, and dried thyme, broiled for 8 to 10 minutes at high heat, high enough to form a slight char on the mustard crust, which concentrates its volatile compounds. Serve with lemon and eat the skin, which concentrates vitamin D. The disciples on the shore of Galilee ate fish cooked this way at dawn. After a night of failed fishing, in the company of someone they were still trying to understand, the meal grounded them. That, too, is a kind of medicine. Number 1. The 7 Sacred Foods Feast Bowl, the meal commanded in Deuteronomy. Now here is the one that changes how you read everything else. Deuteronomy, Oshim, Oshim. God is speaking to Moses about the land the Israelites are being led toward, and rather than describing it in general terms of abundance, rich soil, good rainfall, productive seasons, the text becomes precise in a way that scholars have debated for 3 millennia. 7 specific foods are named, not the region, not an agricultural principle. 7 foods listed by name: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, dates. The traditional reading has always been agricultural. These are the defining crops of the land, the evidence that it is fertile and capable of sustaining human life. That reading is entirely correct. But when nutritional researchers began analyzing these 7 foods, not as agricultural products, but as a nutritional system, as a set of foods consumed together regularly, what they found was not easily explained as coincidence. Wheat and barley together supply complementary amino acid profiles, filling the protein gaps that each grain has individually. The beta-glucan of barley, combined with the arabinoxylin fiber of whole wheat, produces a synergistic effect on cholesterol reduction that exceeds what either grain accomplishes alone. Together they provide B vitamins thiamine, niacin, folate, B6 in a matrix that the body recognizes and absorbs more efficiently than any supplemental equivalent. Grapes bring resveratrol, quercetin, and the proanthocyanidins of the seeds, compounds that activate the SIRT1 longevity pathway and simultaneously protect the cardiovascular system at the level of the endothelium, the single-cell lining of every blood vessel in the body. Studies have found that these compounds also cross the blood-brain barrier, where they reduce neuroinflammation and support the same neuronal signaling pathways that omega-3 fatty acids support. Figs supply what the grains and fruits don't provide in sufficient quantities: calcium, in concentrations that rival dairy, magnesium, potassium. The fig's pectin fiber selectively feeds bifidobacterium, precisely the bacterial genus most associated with reduced systemic inflammation. The figs fill nutritional gaps in the system, as if the list was designed with those gaps in mind. Pomegranates deliver urolithin A precursors, punicalagins that the gut microbiome converts into a compound now being studied for its effects on cellular cleanup processes associated with aging. The antioxidant concentration outranks every other fruit in the system, and most other fruits measured. The combination of pomegranate polyphenols with the pectin fiber of figs appears to feed a different segment of the microbiome than either alone, extending the prebiotic coverage across a broader range of beneficial species. The olives eaten whole, not just the oil pressed from them, deliver oleourapane alongside the oleocanthal that operates on the same anti-inflammatory pathway as ibuprofen, along with vitamin E and the monounsaturated fats that make every fat-soluble compound in this entire bowl significantly more bioavailable. The olives are not a side element. They are the activation mechanism for much of what surrounds them. Remove the olives and the fat-soluble vitamins from the grapes, figs, and pomegranates are absorbed at a fraction of the rate. Add the olives back, and the entire nutritional system changes. Dates provide rapid natural energy alongside fiber that attenuates the blood sugar response, tannins with documented antimicrobial activity, and potassium for blood pressure regulation. They also contribute a sweetness that makes this bowl genuinely desirable, rather than medicinal, something you want to eat every day. Which is the point. When researchers analyze these 7 foods as a system, not as individual ingredients, but as a designed combination, they find something that has no clean explanation. If you approach it as accident, each food provides what the others lack. The protein gaps in the grains are covered by the amino profiles of the fruits. The fat-soluble vitamins from the olives are delivered precisely alongside the water-soluble vitamins from the fresh produce. The anti-inflammatory compounds from multiple distinct molecular families appear to operate synergistically, producing effects greater than any single ingredient could generate alone. The prebiotic coverage spans multiple bacterial genera that would otherwise require supplementation from numerous separate sources. Build this bowl: whole grain barley and ancient wheat emmer, or spelt if you can find them, as the base. Fresh grapes, sliced figs, pomegranate seeds scattered throughout, a handful of whole olives, medjool dates on the side. Everything finished with cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil. Poured generously, not measured. Eat it and understand something the people of the ancient world understood completely, without a single clinical trial to confirm it. This was not just a description of a fertile land. It was a prescription for a life well lived. And 3,000 years later, cardiologists, oncology researchers, gut health specialists, and neuroscientists keep arriving at the same convergence point: the same 7 foods, the same combinations, the same outcomes that the Israelites were already standing in. Here is the thing that most people miss when they start trying to incorporate any of this. The compounds that make these foods work: the beta-glucan, the oleocanthal, the resveratrol, the allicin. The urolithin precursors are extraordinarily sensitive to processing. Industrial olive oil refined at high heat loses the oleocanthal entirely. Pearl barley, with its bran removed, loses most of its beta-glucan. Commercial grape juice, pasteurized and stripped of its sediment, contains a fraction of the polyphenol content of whole fresh grapes eaten with their skins and seeds. Garlic powder does not form allicin. It cannot. The enzymatic reaction requires the fresh cellular structure to be disrupted. The principle that runs through every item on this list is the same principle the closer to its original form. The more it does, the more it has been refined, heated, concentrated, stabilized for shelf life, or processed for convenience, the less of what made it valuable remains. The ancient world didn't refine its food, not because it lacked the capacity, but because the food people ate without refinement kept them healthy in ways they could observe directly and immediately. We have spent the last century building an industry around removing precisely the parts that worked and replacing them with convenience. The question worth sitting with, the one that might stay with you after this video ends, is not which of these 12 meals to cook first. It's this: at what point did we decide that the knowledge encoded in 4,000 years of observed human health was less reliable than the product on the shelf with the health claim printed on the label? If this kind of question is the kind you want to keep exploring, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone in your life who's been searching for answers that make sense. Leave a comment below about which meal you're starting with this week. And tell us, what would you like us to dig into next? There is a great deal more where this came from,